Hello, this is Eric. Today is February 26th, 2023, and in this video, we will continue talking about the Oligarchic Republic. Yes, in our last video, we began talking about these important periods of the history of Brazil, and we covered such topics as, the governor's policy, the fact that São Paulo and Minas Gerais took turns in presiding the country, right, with the presidents and also with, the politicians in the other spheres of the political power. And we mentioned the colonels, right, how they built their power in all the states of Brazil. And we also mentioned some movements that occurred, some protests, some wars that occurred in this period. Actually, to be more accurate, we showed you two movements that occurred at the time. The first one was the vaccine revolt, and the other one was the Contestado War. But guys, I was really eager to start talking about the next phase of the history of Brazil. But the truth is that this part of the history of Brazil, the Oligarchic Republic, is huge and it's very important. So there's a lot to be discussed here, to be shown to you, and I decided to show you these other movements so you can have, the entire puzzled form, and thus you might be able, to see the image of this period of the Brazilian history in a complete manner, right? So let's talk about the social movements that took place during the Oligarchic Republic. And when we finish it, then we'll move on to the crisis of the Oligarchic Republic and the onset of the Vargas era in Brazil, okay? Well, so we had some very important social movements, right? As I said, we mentioned two of them, right? The vaccine revolt and the Contestado War, right? These two took place in the urban environment, right? However, there were other movements that took place outside of the urban environment, right? And we're also going to mention them. Okay, so the movements we will talk about are the following ones: Canudos, the Cangaço, or the outlaws, the lash revolt, the general strike of 1917, and the Modernist Movement. Okay, so here you see a picture, right? And this picture regards the Canudos War, right? The Canudos conflict. And here you have another picture. You can clearly see that there's a lot of people here involved. On the back here, you clearly have soldiers. And here you have a multitude of people. You can clearly see that these are poor people, right? And now let's zoom in to understand, this movement in more detail, in a more detailed manner. So this was a messianic movement. Just like the Contestado War, we had the leadership here. We had as a leader Antônio Conselheiro. He was a religious figure, right, that led this people, this miserable people from the countryside of Brazil. And basically, this area of Brazil, the northeastern, was extremely poor at the time. And there were some regions that were literally forsaken by the political power. They were commanded by the local colonels. There was lots of injustice. There was lots of poverty. exclusion, oppression, right? The government, the landowners, the colonels, they oppressed these people, right? And the authorities simply omitted their opinion. They were simply really there was a whole lot of omission, from the authorities. So then this guy here, and that's why it's going to be another messianic movement, because he's a religious figure, right? Just like in the War of Contestado, right? When we had that monk there, that priest. And there we can understand, that the period when this movement occurred went from 1893 to 1897, right, during the Prudente de Moraes government. The region was the Belo Monte, right, and it was basically a religious community created by Conselheiro, the leader, right, on the banks of the Vaza River, of the Vaza Berries River in the camp of Canudos, backwoods of Bahia, as I said, northeastern region of the country, right? They were basically, guys, totally isolated in Brazil, right? They were not encompassed by the Republic. They lived a community economy where all the tasks, right, were divided by the residents. So it was pretty much like, communism in its most essential manner, right? The residents were invited to perform tasks of the collective, such as, I use, PowerPoint translator here, and I forgot to correct it, but it says that the residents were divided to perform collective tasks such as building houses and planting swidens, right? As I said, it was a messianic movement, right? Because you had the leadership of Conselheiro, right? And as the opposition, you had the church. Although Conselheiro was, affirmed that he was a Christian, right? He also affirmed, some really messianic authority over these people, right? And obviously the landowners, the colonels, they were against it because, these people defied, their authorities there at the time, and the government as well. Consequently, since the government supported, these colonels, remember, all the milk coffee republic worked like this. You had the government supporting these local colonels that in their turn, would give support to the maintenance of the milk coffee republic, right? So all this system here, church plus landowners, colonels, and government, were opposing this group of people that were, again, I'm going to say that they were miserable, right? And they were simply dividing the tasks, collectively. They were building houses. They were miserable. They were poor. And since the government really didn't do anything for them, then they joined forces, and they resisted this opposition. So more and more the federal government, following, the colonels' opposition, they would repress these people, and they sent 4 military expeditions. And unfortunately, at the end of these expeditions, we had a total number of 25,000 people dead, right? And there is, a book here in Brazil that narrates, all the episodes and the entire movement in detail, right, by Euclides da Cunha. All right, so here you have another picture. As you can see, these are the Cangaços, right? The Cangaceiros. Cangaço is the movement name, and these people here that look like soldiers, they are the Cangaços. let's understand more. And here, yes, you're right. This is a woman. She was married to this guy here called Lampião, one of the leaders of the Cangaço movement. Cangaço is a word in Portuguese that is translated as outlaw movement. And we're going to understand this is the most famous of the Cangaço leaders, right? His name was Virgulino Ferreira da Silva. He's better known as Lampião, right? So this is Lampião, and again, this is Lampião and his wife, Maria Bonita, right? So you see this group there. And, well, again, as you know, in the northeastern backwoods, we had lots of misery and lots of poverty going on, right? And the people, as you know, was oppressed by, the colonels, right? The colonels who rule the roost, who really who really commanded things and who really set the rules for everything. So this Cangaço movement began in the late 19th century and was only finished and was only overcome in 1940 in the government of Getúlio Vargas. So these guys remained around for lots of years. And, well, they were known because, really the Cangaço movement was about social banditry, right? These guys, tired of the colonels, they armed themselves. They were like nomad gangs, and they would attack cities and farms throughout the backwoods. They would attack local merchants as well, but normally they would focus on farms, right? And they were known, just like if you are from the U.S., for example, you're familiar, obviously, with the with the story of Bonnie and Clyde, right? The difference is that Bonnie and Clyde were basically two guys, right? A couple, actually, right? One man and a woman. But obviously there were many other people involved with them that supported them and so on, right? So here you have basically the same thing, especially during the Virgulino, the Lampião period. You had Lampião and his wife, Maria Bonita, right? And you had all the other guys, right, who would be with them, that would attack the farms, the cities with them, right? And the people, some people around, some people among, the country residents would support them, because, they would basically, as I said, they would focus on the farms. They would focus on the colonels, right? Although sometimes they also attacked, as I said, local commerce and this kind of thing. So, again, we had three leaders, Antonio Silvino, Virgulino Ferreira, this guy is the most famous one, and Corisco, right? And, as I said, they were very famous. They lasted for many and many years. It was very difficult, to find them. And it was even more difficult to defeat them because they were always well-armed, well-equipped. And, the scenario, the environment where they lived was made it very difficult, for the government to find them, to capture them, and to defeat them. But eventually, Getúlio Vargas, as I said, in 1940, he really joined forces, and he could defeat the Cangaço movement, right? Well, in this picture here, you have basically the battleships, right? This is a battleship from São Paulo. There's a Rio de Janeiro battleship. But the most important thing is that you understand that this was a very important movement at the time, and it was called the Lash Revolt, right? It was a rebellion by the sailors of the São Paulo and Minas Gerais battleship. And basically they complained about the low pay, the poor diet, overwork, and also especially concerning the physical punishments they were subject to, right? Including the use of the lash, thus the name lash revolt, right? The period, it happened in the year of 1910 in the government of President Hermes da Fonseca, right? That took place in Rio de Janeiro, and their leader was João Cândido, the Black Admiral, right? The thing is that, unfortunately, this movement was kind of defeated by the federal government. However, they achieved, some conquests, like, the end of physical punishments, right? And the end of overwork. Even so, low pay was not really resolved. Poor diet remained for some time. And their leader, João Cândido, later on was sent, to a hospital of people who have mind problems, right? You know what I mean? And at the time, it had nothing to do with treating people, but they would really punish people there, right? So this is what happened in this case of the Lash Revolt. I hope you're being able to put all the pieces of your puzzle together and having a better image of this important period of the history of Brazil that is the Oligarchic Republic, right? Here you have another movement that was the General Strike of 1917, right? You see all these people here, right? They are walking in the streets of São Paulo, but that movement also reached Rio de Janeiro and Porto Alegre in the south of the country, right? So basically, and here you have the newspaper A Gazeta. It says here, agitation, the workers' agitation is expanded throughout all the factories, right? And it says here, the situation is thoroughly severe. Very good. So yeah, as you can see, really it was a movement that shook the country at the time, right? And basically what we had here was the poor working conditions of workers, low wages, really high workloads. People, the workers work at many and many hours, right? And we had the immigrants in the country. These immigrants that came, most of them came from Europe. They brought from Europe, their socialism, the anarchism and anarcho-syndicalism influences, right? All these ideologies were imported from Europe through these immigrants, right? And really, the thing became hot. The situation here became really grievous, and well, it took place during the government of President Venceslau Braz. And as I said, the movement relied on the participation of many immigrants. At the end, basically the federal government defeated, those workers, right? They practically didn't achieve any improvements in their conditions. And these immigrants, the immigrants that participated and all the people, the leaders who participated, they were either arrested or in the case of immigrants, they were deported. They were banished from Brazil, right? I don't know what the term for that is in English, but anyway, they were banished from Brazil. They were sent back to Europe, okay? And also, guys, you have here the Modernist Movement, right? This is a picture. We have here some of the artists that participated in this movement. That is a cultural movement. Okay, here you have Oswaldo Cruz, for example. You have Mário de Andrade and other people that really led, the movement. So basically, the movement, guys, was a criticism concerning the academicism and elitism. We had at the time, for example, Parnassianism and many other cultural, let's say, spheres that did not represent the people, that did not represent the national culture. So basically, the Modern Art Week of 1922 in São Paulo was a movement regarding the valuation, the appreciation of the national culture. They produced, culture that encompassed the indigenous culture, the hillbilly culture, the folklore, the national folklore, the working class life. And as I said, the most famous names here are Oswaldo de Andrade, Mário de Andrade, Manuel Bandeira, Anita Malfatti, she was a painter, Di Cavalcanti, Villa-Lobos in the music sphere, Tarsila do Amaral, and Victor Brecheret. Right? You can research all their works on the internet, on Wikipedia, and so on. It's really worth it, guys. Especially Mário de Andrade, right? Anita Malfatti, Villa-Lobos, excellent instrumentist, and Tarsila do Amaral, right? Well, we also had on the economic sphere, guys, some interesting things that we should be commenting about. We have the funding loan, right, which was a renegotiation of foreign debt with British creditors during the government of President Campos Salles, right? If you remember, we had the settling policy, right, still in the Sword Republic or Republic of Sword, right? And that really devastated the country's economy. So here we have a renegotiation of the foreign debt, right, with the British creditors. They established a moratorium that is a suspension of the payment of the debt for 13 years that allowed Brazil to breathe, a little more for a few years. And yeah, they got a loan, a 10 million pounds loan again. So more loans for Brazil, right? We had the financial sanitation. That was a thing that took place from 1898 to 1902. Right? It was deflationary policy aimed at currency appreciation implemented by the finance minister of the Campos Salles government. So again, we had in the Republic of Swords, we had the settling movement, the settling policy. It devastated the economy. Now we have this deflationary policy, which aimed to correct or at least to relieve the aspects, of the damage produced by the settling policy at the time. So the objectives of this deflationary policy were less inflation, budget balance, and currency valuation. The currency at the time was reais, right? The measures taken were tax increase. Tax increase, oh yeah. The country was poor. We had coronels everywhere. We had lots of poverty and unemployment, but yeah, taxes were increased. Wage freeze, yeah. Credit restriction with the increase in interest, right? So the interest tax was increased, and we had restricted release of credit. Right? Cutting public spending, at least one positive thing, and paper money incineration. Yes, because in the settling policy, we had lots of paperwork produced. So by incinerating, the excessive paper money from that time, we would control inflation, right? Oops, sorry, it was not translated here. The consequences in Portuguese is consequences. The consequences were currency valuation. Yes, at least it worked in this sense. We had the budget surplus. We had recession, obviously, right? Wage freeze, tax increase, what do you expect? And increased unemployment. Yeah, obviously, right? So we also had the rubber cycle, right, during the entire Oligarchic Republic. Here you have the image of this guy here extracting latex, right, rubber. And, well, the factors here, guys, basically were the industrial expansion. Yeah, basically Brazil during the Oligarchic Republic was pretty much about coffee, right? But during the First World War, we had and we are going to talk about that in more detail shortly, we had a brief industrial outbreak, okay? So really, Brazil was involved in providing, some of the things that the nations, the superpowers in Europe needed, to continue their conflict, right? So here, for example, concerning the industrial expansion, to provide, these nations, not only for that, okay, guys, but especially during the First World War, we would provide, raw material for the machinery and automobile industry, right? In America, yes, as well, and in Europe, right? So we would have latex extraction in the Amazon forest, right? So as a consequence, we had lots of people migrating from the northeast to the north region. Yeah, because the northeast, the people who lived in the northeastern areas, they were poor. They were desperate. So when they realized, that there was, there was money, flowing here in this area of the north region, in this region, right, of the north, then they decided to go there. So basically, as a consequence, we're going to have the modernization of Manaus and Belém. Manaus is close to the Amazon forest, right? And Belém as well, right? It's not that far from the forest, from the Amazon forest. We are going, this is obvious, right? We're going to have the formation of an elite of rubber colonels. Yes, land concentration. So these guys that were already rich, they are going to become millionaires during this industrial expansion, this latex extraction period, right? And consequently, we're going to have the formation of a miserable mass of rubber tapers consisting mainly of northeastern migrants displaced by drought. So since they had drought in the countryside of the northeastern regions, they would move, they would migrate to the north region, but obviously they are not going to make money. They're going to work like hell, but really they're going to be working only to enrich the rubber kernels, right? And the decadence of this rubber cycle took place because, as time went by, they would have, they would have to compete with Southeast Asia, right? They had more modern production techniques that would produce more. And, well, they were able, for example, to produce synthetic rubber derived from petroleum. And so, really, the rubber coming from Brazil became primitive and became, useless. Okay? So, that's how it ended. That's how it ended. And here, we have another important event of the time. Here you have a local newspaper at the time, O Malho, right? And it is about the Taubaté Agreement, right? The Taubaté Agreement took place in 1906. It was an agreement between São Paulo coffee growers, the state governments of São Paulo, Minas Gerais, and Rio de Janeiro, and bankers from the USA and England, right? Basically, what we had was a super production of coffee, and consequently there was a drop in coffee prices on the international market. So the objective really was, somehow work for the appreciation of coffee again. The Brazilian economy worked pretty much based on coffee at the time. We had practically no industry going on. The Brazilian industry would only be boosted during the Vargas period, right? So the coffee appreciation policy was established during the government of President Afonso Pena from 1906 to 1909. So basically, the measures taken to towards or aimed at the coffee appreciation was the purchase and a stock of coffee production surplus by state governments. So they would purchase and stock the surplus of the coffee production. They would restrict the planting of new coffee plants, right? So, yes, not too much coffee being exported anymore. And they would increase domestic coffee consumption, right? So that's how the Taubaté Agreement worked, to balance, the coffee production and, with the support of bankers from the USA and England, they would keep on, causing the country to make a lot of money based on coffee. Okay? And now, guys, we're going to be talking about the industrial outbreak, right, in Brazil. Actually, guys, this is not the first industrial outbreak, okay? The first industrial outbreak took place in the 19th century, around the time when the Eusébio de Queiroz law was enacted here in Brazil, right? At the time, we had like an incentive, to the local industry in that context. And now, from 1914 to 1918, we're going to have a situation in which the United States will be supplying the superpowers in Europe because they are in the First World War, right? And Brazil, consequently, will be providing, the USA will be providing to the USA and also to Europe some really important raw materials, such as rubber, for example. And we had plenty of labor available, right? We had the immigrants in Brazil and also people coming from the northeastern area, from the northeastern region. They were poor, they were trying to escape the drought, right? And they're really available to work. And they, as we had said, they enriched, the local colonels, right? Who became millionaires with rubber. And basically, it worked really well for Brazil. We had the rubber cycle during this period that was moved based on the First World War. However, as the war ended, really, we began to have, the competition of, other industries like the Asian industries moved by the superpowers in Europe that were beginning to be rebuilt. And Brazil was not able to compete with these other nations, as we had mentioned in one of the slides that we have already shown you, right? And basically, all these companies really that were encouraged at this time. Later on, around the 1920s, they would go bankrupt. Okay, so here you have a complete image, a complete puzzle image of the oligarchic movement, and in our next video we will be showing you, the crisis of the Oligarchic Republic and the beginning of the Vargas era in Brazil, right? Thank you so much for being with me, and see you in our next video.